In this section of Revolutionary World, we'll be looking at revolutionary terror. The French Revolution at this point had already accomplished so much, as the monarchy was now at the mercy of the people, and the tax burden was spread more equally, along with the ability to vote, and the king was at the mercy of the people who had voting rights. However, the new government lasted less than a year, as new leadership took the government in a much more radical or extreme direction, as others actually turned counter-revolutionary or against the revolution. And the first thing we're going to look at is the failures of the early revolution. While the French Revolution had changed France from an absolute monarchy to a constitutional monarchy, the revolution failed to achieve stability due to a number of factors that turned the revolution much more radical. One, the king still refused to accept the limitations of the constitutional monarchy. The National Assembly, or the Legislative Assembly, had drafted a constitution, and Louis XVI had yet to accept it. Two, the persecution of the Catholic Church now alarmed the religious and the peasantry. When you look back at things like the land confiscation and the loyalty oaths that the priests were forced to take, becoming more loyal to France than the church. And thirdly, the poor economy was made even worse with rising inflation that raised the price of goods. Inflation is the devalue of money. Where it may have taken 2 coins to purchase a loaf of bread, now we're looking at 5 or 10 coins. So what a couple of coins once got you no longer gets you that thing. And so the price of goods increases, and it takes more money to buy things that you used to be able to buy. That is devalue of money. That's what we call inflation. So we mentioned earlier that new leadership is taking over the government of France. So let's look at these new political factions that are forming in France. In 1792, France went to war with Austria to protect the revolution, as political factions, or what we call political parties in some places, formed between opposing views of whether the revolution itself had done enough and was still worth fighting for. First, we had the Feuillants, who felt that the revolution did enough already and wanted to keep the constitutional monarchy as they had proposed it. Secondly, you have the Girondins, who were representing the people of Paris, but many of them feared the radical attitude of the mobs in Paris, but still favored a republican form of government. And lastly, you have the Jacobins. They represented the people outside of Paris, who felt the revolution hadn't done enough, and also pushed for a republic and more revolutionary ideas. Now, between the three of these, all of them agreed and favored that war was needed and necessary. For the Feuillants, what they see is that if the invading armies of Austria and Prussia were to come in and crush the French army, that they would then go on to strengthen Louis XVI's reign, making him even more of an absolute monarch, and all the things that the French people had gained thus far would be for nothing. They'd lose everything. For the Girondins, they also feel that what they've gained so far is important to keep, and that if France loses the war with Austria and Prussia, that those armies will come in and change things back to the way it was. Also, they feel that a war will kind of strengthen the need for a different type of government, that the king cannot handle this, that it's going to be a republic. What they've already started to do with the National or Legislative Assembly is needed to control France and control Paris. For the Jacobins, they go a step further, thinking that the war is necessary, again, to hold on to the changes that have already taken place in France. But also for the Jacobins, they see war as necessary to continue on their further plans. During wartime, you have to take extreme measures to get things done. And it's that extremities that take place during wartime that the Jacobins want to use to their advantage to push forward even more revolutionary ideas that under normal circumstances wouldn't be allowed, but being that it's wartime, that gives them the justification to take even more extreme actions. So for them, the war is necessary to keep this revolutionary feel going and have this wartime authority to make changes. Now again, the Jacobins felt that the revolution hasn't done enough and want to take it even further. Those that want to take it to an even extreme point are known as the sans-culottes, who become the more radical branch of the Jacobins within Paris. These are the ones that the Girondins feared, the mob in Paris that are actually Jacobins, not Girondins. And the sans-culottes basically means those without breeches. Breeches means knee pants, the fancy knee pants that a lot of nobility and aristocrats would have wore. So those without breeches or knee pants wore regular pants, showing their hatred for the aristocracy by wearing these pants and not knee pants, not breeches, as you can see from the picture here of the guy wearing a pair of pants, which this is the time when pants become standard dress. Now, the sans-culottes play a vital role in the next phase of the French Revolution when they begin to riot, forming a commune and seize control of the government of Paris, which forces Louis XVI to seek refuge in the Legislative Assembly, which ends the monarchy and imprisons him for his own protection to make sure that the mob, that these riots from the sans-culottes don't reach him. And so Louis XVI at this point in no sense is in any type of control of France. Now, the Legislative Assembly calls for elections in the National Convention. This is the birth of the French Republic. They're actually going to elect people to positions of power. And it's here where we start to see the figureheads of the new revolution. Now that the monarchy is gone with this new republic, France is now at the mercy of the voices of the people, and none other stand out more than anybody else than Maximilien Robespierre, known as the Incorruptible. He had such a high moral standard that he could not be corrupted, supposedly. He is a Jacobin. He's a Jacobin lawyer who dominated the National Convention, calling for liberty, equality, and fraternity for all. Again, the rallying cry of the revolution. Another key figure that becomes one of the voices of the people is Jean-Paul Marat. He is a radical newspaper journalist. He owns a newspaper called the Friend of the People, who supported the revolution while calling for the deaths of enemies of the people or the revolution. Those that didn't agree with the Jacobin belief that the revolution needs to go even farther, he saw them as enemies not only of the revolution but of the people, and these people needed to be dealt with. In this case, they should be killed. Now, how they should be killed is through a new invention. He was a huge supporter of the guillotine, becoming the penalty for challenging the revolution, which is this device that you see on the right that uses a fixed blade to decapitate victims. Now, why this becomes such a prominent device during the French Revolution is, prior to this, those people that were killed or executed typically got either burned at the stake if you're a heretic, or maybe got an axe. It was only the nobility or people that were royal that got a sword, a very sharp sword. And it was seen as, being beheaded was an easy way out. It's the way that the nobility or sometimes royalty would be executed. This device actually decapitates victims as well. And so during this French Revolution where we're all equal, then we're all going to be equal in death as well, or how we're executed. Not just the fancy nobility or aristocrats are going to be executed by being beheaded by a nice sharp blade like a sword. This device treats everyone equally. So how this device would work is you would simply lay down on these boards here. This part here would be moved up a little bit so you could fit your head in a little round circle and close down and clamp down to keep your head still. And of course, and then they would drop this blade down, severing your head from your neck. And usually it would fall in a basket beneath. This device, more than anything else, comes to symbolize the radical nature of the revolution, because this device won't be used just a few times. It will be used thousands of times during the French Revolution to decapitate people who were seen as enemies of the revolution or the people. The last voice of the revolution then to mention is Georges Danton. He helps the army gain recruits who defended well against the Austrian and Prussian armies and begin to go on the offensive. So when the Austrian and Prussian armies are coming into French territory, it is Danton that actually rallies the French people, the people of Paris especially, to go out and join the army and fight off this foreign threat. In his new citizen army, citizens were trained, issued weapons, and advanced to command positions, increasing the army to 850,000 troops. This more than exceeded France's enemies. No other army in Europe could even come close to that number. Now, most of these men at first are very inexperienced, but after some time fighting the Austrians and the Prussians, who have small armies but well-trained armies, it's not long before the French army very, very quickly learns and becomes this force to be reckoned with. I mean, even before we talked about the French population being the largest in Europe, able to have one of the largest armies in Europe, now anybody can join the army. We're going to train these people and issue them weapons. So at that point, all the French population becomes essentially a citizen army when we arm everybody in France. This is a huge number to reckon with. Not that everybody's fighting, but the possibility that everyone could fight is there. But as I said earlier, this first citizen army is not as well prepared as the Austrians and Prussians. So at first, the Austrian and Prussians are crushing the French army and moving closer and closer to Paris. This is where things turn much more radical, as the voices of the revolution, those that see the revolution needs to continue on and do more things, feel like a cornered animal, and they start to lash out, and things get a lot more extreme. So this is where we have the radical revolution. Now, as Austria and Prussia move on Paris, the National Assembly will go on to imprison over 1,000 people. These are people that they see as enemies of the revolution or the people. And this is to put down any kind of counter-revolutionary force that's there. Basically, anybody that's against the revolution, in the minds of the National Assembly, if you're not with us, you're against us, they imprison these people. So as Austria and Prussia move in, Jean-Paul Marat says we need to kill these prisoners, because the fear is, what happens if the invading army reaches Paris, reaches these prisons, and unleashes these prisoners that were against the revolution to begin with? All of a sudden, the Austrian and Prussian army have just got some new recruits, and we can't allow that. So how do we stop that from happening? Marat says, kill them. This will lead to the September Massacre of 1792, when the sans-culottes actually invade the Parisian prisons and kill all inside. Several women are raped, the priests are disemboweled, and others are just simply hacked to death. They're butchered. And this is a horrible scene, and really starting to show how radical things have turned, how people are just kind of getting caught up in this, and things are just turning from bad to worse. And at the end of 1792, there's a big decision that's put before the people of France, and that is what to do with Louis XVI. He had been captured trying to flee to Austria, been brought back to Paris. At one point, he had had to seek refuge with the Legislative Assembly when the sans-culottes started to riot there in Paris. What do we do with Louis XVI? He's really no longer in power, but what do we do with him? Well, this becomes a decision that's going to be decided in the trial of Louis XVI in December of 1792. He is put on trial and convicted of treason. Treason is going against your country. In this sense, it's interpreted that his attempt to flee to Austria and bring an invading army against his own people is seen as treason. Now the question is, what should be his punishment? The Girondins say he should be spared, whereas the Jacobins want him executed just like everyone else. For the Girondins, they still haven't gotten away from this idea that we've gotten rid of privilege in France. No one is special or better than anyone else. The nobility is no different than the peasant. We're all equal. There really is no more nobility. Or the Jacobins say, if we're really truly going to embrace these enlightened ideas and this revolution that we've started, where everyone is equal, then the king is no different than anyone else. If anyone else had done what the king did and committed treason, they would be executed, no questions asked. So why is the king any different? So for the Jacobins, since all people are equal in this new republic, before the republic can fully begin, the monarchy must die. And so that becomes Louis XVI's fate. In January of 1793, the king is beheaded, and Marie Antoinette will follow soon after. This sends shockwaves across Europe, because the rest of Europe is controlled by monarchs who are looking at this saying, if this can happen in France, the largest and most powerful country in continental Europe, then this could easily happen here. What happens if my people decide to do what the French did and rise up against me? Might I get my head chopped off? And so the royalty and the nobility are very, very closely watching what's happening in France, and they're getting very, very scared. Now, that summer in July, Jean-Paul Marat is also killed in his bath by a Girondin assassin named Charlotte Corday, believing that his death might end the radical violence that he had been advocating, like killing the prisoners back in September. So at this point, if the people of France thought that things couldn't get any more extreme or radical, they would be mistaken, because the next and final phase of the French Revolution becomes known as the Terror. After Louis XVI's execution, a foreign coalition of Austria, Prussia, Spain, Portugal, and Britain come together and are formed to restore order in France. This external threat intensified the radical revolution, pitting revolutionaries against counter-revolutionaries for control of France. Now, this foreign coalition is large, but it has to be. If we remember, the French army has just grown tremendously huge now that they have a citizen army. And now that all these countries are against France and against the revolutionaries, this is where you start to see counter-revolutionaries popping up saying, enough is enough, we must stop this. Well, of course, those that are revolutionaries feel even more backed into a corner and turn even more radical and extreme. And this is when the reign of terror begins, where the revolutionaries just go ahead and revoke the Constitution in favor of an oligarchy, an executive oligarchy ruled by a few people. This executive oligarchy will be known as the Committee of Public Safety. This executive council elected to protect the Republic from external threats like the attacking coalition and internal threats like those that were against the revolution, these counter-revolutionaries, and hopefully to stabilize France under a much more radical republic. So this Committee of Public Safety's job is to maintain public safety from, again, external and internal threats. And what they see as internal threats, many in France may not see it that way. And the person that's kind of put in charge of this Committee of Public Safety is Maximilien Robespierre. With massive authority granted to the Committee of Public Safety, Robespierre becomes its unofficial head and starts to rule France kind of like a dictator. One of the first things that he does is try to eliminate Christian influence. In the mind of some of these extreme revolutionaries, if we're going to be a truly enlightened nation, enlightened society that bases everything on pure reason and fact, then religion would have no place, because religion is based solely on faith, not necessarily fact. It's nothing that can be proven, you just have faith and believe. So in this truly enlightened society that he's wanting to create, all references to Christianity must be eliminated. So one way that they do that is streets with the name Saint in them are renamed. 1792 becomes year one, because the way that we in the Western world date our years, our calendar years, is on the birth of Christ. 1792, in this case, represented 1792 years since the birth of Christ. So the years themselves were based on a religious thing. That gets changed. 1792 becomes year one, the birth of the Republic. And lastly, even the calendar gets changed as the people of France go to a 10-day week, whereas the 7-day week has its roots in the Bible, where the Bible says that God created the world and everything else in 6 days and rested on the 7th, therefore 7-day week. That gets eliminated to a 10-day week. And if that wasn't bad enough, the Committee of Public Safety and Robespierre created a secret police that sent spies out to find counter-revolutionaries, using essentially terror to scare them out of hiding, causing paranoia, with 40,000 people executed, mostly peasants. So if someone simply complained about the rations of bread, that could get you in trouble and seen as a counter-revolutionary, and therefore you could be arrested, tried, and executed soon after, just for complaining about the revolution or bread. So things are getting crazy and wild here in France, and you can see from this political cartoon done in England, this is how they viewed what was happening in the French Revolution, where you have just these wild and crazy looking people here with their guillotine essentially catching the world on fire. They are destroying everything about civilized society in this revolution. And also what makes this more interesting is the revolution was started to help the people, the lower classes, gain some form of equality. During this terror part, it's interesting that most of the people that are executed aren't former aristocrats or nobility, they're mostly peasants, those that the French Revolution was supposed to help, and now they're killing them in large numbers. But of course, the Reign of Terror doesn't last forever. With the French citizen army's defeat of the First Coalition Army and counter-revolutionary threat gone, many felt that Robespierre's brutal and radical tactics were unnecessary, especially after he had Georges d'Estaing executed. And Georges d'Estaing was a very well-respected and highly regarded member of Paris society. When he is executed, many people really feel Robespierre has went too far. Even the committee itself, the Committee on Public Safety, turns on Robespierre and sees him as an enemy of the state, and therefore he meets the fate of the guillotine and is executed. And his execution is what officially ends the Reign of Terror. And now we start to move towards the end of the revolution. Now with the leader of the Reign of Terror dead, many became very eager to find a stable and peaceful government. So the people of France actually sit down and write a new constitution, placing executive power with a group known as the Directory. Now the Directory only lasts for 4 years there, from 1795 to 1799, and it is a group of 5 men who ruled France and really attempted to bring some sort of peace and stability to the Republic. But they are constantly trying to defend their authority, and the directors increasingly have to rely on the army to help put down rebellions and even support their positions within France. So, unable to fix the financial and political problems within France, the French Republic was eager for a strong leader to deal with the crisis and turns to the army, very much like the Roman Republic had once done, where they looked to one strong leader. And that strong leader will be Napoleon Bonaparte, who conducts a coup d'etat, which officially means, in French, a blow to the state, but typically means an overthrow of the government, as he marches on the Directory with his army and dismisses them. Napoleon goes on to write a new constitution, setting up a consulate, or a rule by 3, with himself in charge as dictator. Again, this is very, very similar to what happened in the Roman Republic with the triumvirates of the Caesars. Now, as the French Revolution ends with the rise of Napoleon, troubles of Europe aren't over. The French Revolution had only unshackled France from its feudalistic laws of the past, as Napoleon now attempts to bring the benefits of the revolution to the rest of Europe through an expanded empire.